Welcome to First Teachings, the class formerly known as Treasure Hunt. I'm Carl Skooglund, and we're here to explore the first teachings of the Buddhist tradition. And this morning, we will pick up where we left off in the April class and continue to work with the teaching, with the lessons that the Buddha offers us in the Sutta Sutta, which is the teaching referred to as the cook. And practice-wise, practitioner-wise, we might come to this path with the hope of coming into a little more peace, coming into a little more clarity, and coming into a little more freedom. And then, as you might have experienced, we try to be mindful, as they say, in our sitting practice and in our daily lives. And sometimes this practice seems to work, and sometimes it doesn't seem to work. The benefits might seem a little random. But I love this teaching, this particular teaching, because it's a straightforward answer to the question, how do I make the fruits of this path less random and more reliable? Now, in this teaching, the Buddha sets out a simile such that on the one hand, there's a cook, who serves food with different kinds of flavors, different kinds of tastes. And then the cook clues in to how his patron responds. The cook clues into what particular tastes their patron enjoys, and the cook is thus rewarded. The teaching then goes on to say that in similar fashion, a Dhamma practitioner, who is working with the various themes of mindfulness, various flavors of mindfulness, you might say, they clue into the signs their mind is giving them. They clue in to how their mind responds, to the themes that the practitioner has offered the mind. And as a result, the practitioner's heart and mind come into a peaceful abiding. Viharati samadhi is the Pali phrase. The practitioner also comes into clarity and also becomes free of attraction, aversion, and confusion. The Pali word for those three is kilesas. The key issue of this teaching, the key issues of this teaching are first, what to bring to mind, what to offer the mind, as a theme of contemplation. And then second, be clear how our hearts and minds respond to what we've offered. So in our last class in April, I started off this teaching by reminding us of the variety of themes that are possible to offer the mind, themes for the heart and mind to contemplate, to meditate on. And according to the cook simile, the themes are the four broad themes of mindfulness laid out in the Satipatthana Sutta, right? They being body, feelings of pleasure and pain, third, the mind itself, and then fourth, the dhammas, the teachings. And I started the last class by reviewing the 6 parts of the body contemplation. That is this breathing body of ours, the 4 bodily postures, the variety of bodily activities, the 32 unpleasant bodily parts, the 4 elements, and then finally the body as it acts after death, known as the charnel ground contemplation. This morning, I want to change the approach quite a bit. And instead of moving on to the contemplation of pleasure and pain, I want to focus on the part of the simile of the cook that talks about the practitioner picking up on the signs, picking up on the hints that their minds give them. Right? Yeah. When they've offered their minds a particular theme. And like I said, there's the theme, of which there are a lot of different kinds, and then there's how our minds respond to the theme. And I want to make the switch because as I started to, really reflect on this myself, um, it's just that this idea of how our minds respond to particular content, it's just so very much of what meditation practice is about. So I want to share a few thoughts of mine about that. And picking up on the signs that our minds are giving us, helps us to make any adjustments if necessary, such that practice is engaging and enlivening, right? Such that our practice leads to peace, to clarity, and to freedom. So anyway, I hope you find this to be helpful. Before we do that, though, I want to offer us a chance to be quiet for a little bit, just for 5 minutes or so. So if you want to first attend to your posture, if that helps, and let your eyes close if you like. And then maybe take a deep in-breath and release that breath. Breathe in deeply, feel your body. Breathe out and relax. Breathe in deeply, feel your body, breathe out and relax. Now for the next 5 minutes or so, I'm going to leave you kind of on your own. You just do your best to keep in mind and pay attention to this breathing body of yours. Pay attention to the sensations that confirm for you that you have a body, that confirm for you that you're breathing. And if you get caught, when you get caught in a thought or an emotion, it's no problem. Just wake up out of that as soon as you can and return your attention to the body, this breathing body. So just a quick taste of practice, which I hope was helpful. So in the Sutta, the ingredients that we as practitioners cook with and then to offer ourselves, are all the different parts of the Satipatthana Sutta. Right? And something to say, the Buddha didn't offer us, just one kind of thing to practice with, and where to take it or to leave it. Instead, he offered a wide variety of things. Because everybody's different, right? And even ourselves, we're different from one day to the next and, from one moment to the next. So that part's good. But one challenge with this tradition is to familiarize ourselves enough with it so that we have a general sense of the variety of things that we can work with. Work with and then dig into and experiment with. Experiment with what the Buddha offered in his 45-year-long teaching career. So the idea is, we experiment and we see what works for us. We can see what works for us generally over time. What works for us in different kinds of circumstances, in different kinds of moments. On one level, this teaching of the cook is so simple in that, we offer a theme to the mind and then we clue into how our hearts and minds respond. But on another level, this practice of cluing into the signs our minds offer us, it's incredibly rich terrain. Incredibly rich terrain for practice, for digging in, experimenting, and exploring. In the text, there's this phrase about how a practitioner, does or does not pick up on the sign, pick up on the hint of their own mind. And the Pali word for sign or hint is nimitta. And the Pali word for mind is chitta. And as you may recall, chitta gets translated as mind, just for ease. But the thing is that we in the West associate mind with the thinking part of our mental world. But in Buddhism, chitta also includes our emotional life. Chitta also includes what we call heart. And now technically, this part of the text, picking up on the sign, is referring to the conditions in which we're just about to really settle in, viharati samadhi, or a peaceful abode. And it's the precursor to jhana types of concentration, very deep concentration where the mind is really unified. So the text is pointing out how we want to clue in, to how the conditions for viharati samadhi, are coming together. Now, in Buddhist practice, feeling in the zone, as we like to say, is that point in which our minds are composed, malleable. Our minds are in a position to shine light on what we want to see. And then we can see clearly. We can then engage in insight. So the challenge is to develop skill in choosing themes and develop skill in seeing how our minds can become peaceful and clear. Let me offer, that being said, let me offer three examples, three possible scenarios about how things might, or about how our minds might respond, to a theme that we've taken up. Okay. So let's say, first we sit down to practice, and start right away with the most fundamental theme. That is, we set up our physical posture, and then we breathe in and we breathe out. And our intention is to keep our attention on the in and out breathing. This is exactly what we did in the 5-minute meditation, right? Well, as you probably know, a number of things might happen, might actually happen, and check this out against, your own 5-minute meditation from just a second ago. In the first scenario, we might pay attention to one in breath, but instead of paying attention to the out breath, a part of our mind creates and gets identified with, caught in a thought world, perhaps it's accompanied by attraction or anger or anxiety or confusion. And then for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, we're lost, we're wandering in samsara. Now, maybe we shake off that thought bubble at some point and we think, darn it, and then we redirect the attention to the breathing. We take one in breath, but then immediately recreate the thought world again, and then are gone again. And by the end of our meditation, we realize we've basically been lost in thought the whole time. At that point, it might be that, we feel the practice is useless, or perhaps we feel that we are useless. So these are some of the signs that our minds might be giving us, the signs being distraction and frustration. These difficult periods could be a sign that, one, you're new to practice, and if that's the case, you can cut yourself a break. That's okay. Or two, maybe you're not new to practice, but it could be a sign that you've just got a lot of stuff that you're dealing with, right? And again, if that's so, you just cut yourself a break. Or three, it could be a sign that, sometimes the mind just creates stormy weather. So again, cut yourself a break. The path does offer us tools to work with this stormy weather. As frustrating as this experience can be, the reality is that this is the way most people live their lives. When you think about it, distracted, wandering, enmeshed in thought worlds. And I'm not trying to be unkind, but thought bubbles are the water that most people on the planet unknowingly swim in. There's not even the possibility of waking up out of thoughts, waking up out of emotions. They are reality. So in the midst of getting frustrated, by being caught in thought and emotion, we might take a moment to replace that frustration with gratitude. Gratitude that at least we're awake to the possibility of something different. And gratitude might even become your theme of contemplation at that point. Just feeling gratitude. So a second scenario that might happen when we practice is that maybe we oscillate between the breathing and thought worlds. We're with the breath for 10 seconds and then we get lost for 10 seconds. And then we come back to the breath and we get lost. And so it goes back and forth. So, we're somewhat distracted and maybe a little frustrated. But, here's the deal. It's actually a good sign that we keep coming back. It's a sign that we've developed an inclination to wake up out of enchantment with thought worlds. Again, this is a good sign, and don't let that sign go unnoticed. Don't let that sign go unnoticed. You might even give yourself a mental fist bump of sorts, tell yourself, good job, and note, and here's an important thing. Notice the pleasure, because that pleasure is another sign, of having woken up out of a thought, woken up out of an emotion. It might be a micro pleasure, but it is a pleasure, and it's a skillful one. And noticing that pleasure, taking some moments to soak it in, will further encourage the inclination to wake up. Now, a third scenario that might happen is that we start out a little distracted, but over 10, 15, or 20 minutes, we settle in. And so proportionally, we're much more with the breath than caught in thought. We're able to settle into that felt sense of peace and inward pleasure. And in this case, the sign that our mind is giving us is that something's working. Something's coming together. Now, this is an experience that we want to keep going. I say that because sometimes you hear that we should apply the lens of impermanence to these experiences of peace and pleasure, and let them go as they become wobbly. But that's not the approach that the Buddha took in the first teachings. In the first teachings, creating these experiences of pleasure and satisfaction, there's something that the Buddha encourages us to do. He encourages us to get good at creating them. And he has us go deeper and deeper into them. In doing this, we're engaging in something that's very unusual in this world, and that is that we're learning to be okay inwardly, right? Rather than wandering and searching the external environment, trying to be okay. Now, these three scenarios, are not spelled out formally in the text, but maybe they map a little bit with experiences that you've had. There's signs of how your practice is going, signs that our hearts and our minds are giving us. And as you probably well know, over time, we'll have our good days and we'll have our bad days. We'll have our satisfying periods and we'll have our challenging periods. I want to set out some additional signs that we might clue into, such that if we're not settling in, we can take the hint that some facet of our practice, is not quite working yet. And then we can make some adjustments to help ourselves out. Now, these particular signs are not spelled out explicitly in the Sutta Sutta, but I think they're definitely in the spirit of the teaching overall. So to start, one important thing that can help us engage in one of the satipatthana, engage in one of the themes of mindfulness, is to not just jump right in, right? If we do the meditation equivalent of pulling a muscle, right? It might be a sign that we didn't warm up, that we didn't stretch before we exercised. So just like before an orchestra plays a symphony, they warm up, and before a pilot takes off, they check all those buttons and dials and gizmos that are in the cockpit. The idea here is that we as practitioners can do a little warm up, check on some things before we start a sit, or set out on a walk or whatever it is we're getting ready to engage in. Now, the Buddha provides a list of things to check on in the preamble to the Satipatthana Sutta. And that is, we're to abide contemplating. We're to be ardent, aware, and mindful. Right? You might think of these as the utensils that we as cooks work with. And then the four satipatthana, body, pleasure, pain, chitta, and the dhammas, they are the ingredients that we work with. Okay, so here we go. So Anupasana is one of the facets that plays into samasati, right mindfulness, along with being ardent, aware, and mindful. Now, with Anupasana, we abide contemplating, right? We abide contemplating the body, for instance. The Pali phrase for that is kayonupasi viharati. Kaya is the body, anupasa means to contemplate, and vihara is an abode, as in Brahma Vihara. Okay, so we abide contemplating, right? That is, we create an abode for ourselves. And you might think of it as a secluded corner, a corner in a favorite place, which you curl up and you get absorbed in something like you do somewhere with a good book, right? Which in this age of distraction and multitasking is becoming a bit of a lost art. Nevertheless, what we're doing here is to make practice the thing that we're doing, not just one of the things that we're doing. We abide contemplating. We do our best to let go of our habits to multitask, and we give our practice our full attention. This is that part of mindfulness practice, that brings something to mind and then sticks with it. And this is how mindfulness becomes concentration. And just to say that in the first teachings, mindfulness is not separate from concentration, as sometimes might be thought. And just like a seed needs stillness to set roots, we need stillness for a period of time in order for us to set roots. So if we're not curling up with a theme, getting established, getting rooted, that's a sign. That's a hint that we should pick up on. Now, if our minds are unsettled, it could be a sign that we've become ambivalent, or doubtful. Part of our mind wants to engage in practice. But if our minds are unsettled, it could be a sign that other agendas have asserted themselves. And, as you may have experienced, sometimes our purposes can get spread a little bit thin, and then they're not as strong. And in particular, our good purposes, might get knocked off balance. And this is where ardency can come into play. Now, ardency can mean to try real hard, but it's more often, it's really more about being skillful. It's about being smart. And in particular, staying mindful about our healthy purposes. Right? And being ardent, we remind ourselves about why we wanted to do this practice. So one thing that can help is to take some time at the beginning of a sit, or in the midst of whatever activity we're engaged in, and establish our purpose, or to reestablish our purpose. We can reflect on whether our minds are taking us places that we want to go, or whether it's to places that hurt. If we're wandering or conflicted, we can check out what our wandering mind is valuing. Right? And we can compare that with what the path would have us value. This does go against the current, because the society tends not to value what the path would have us value. And at the risk of sounding cynical, our society, the media steers us in the direction of excitement and entertainment. And part of that is that our very valuable attention, is treated as a commodity that literally these days gets bought and sold. So Ardency, has us pay careful attention to what we're valuing in any given moment. It's one way to think about it. On a more subtle level, wandering mind could be a sign that parts of our mind don't trust, don't value practice. So in this sense, it's an expression of the hindrance of doubt. And other parts of the mind may feel suspicious of becoming quiet, like it's unsafe. It can feel unsafe to let our guard down and just become peaceful. Or maybe it's a guilt thing. There's that voice that says that there are so many other things that you could be doing, so many other things that you should be doing. Right? So if you're not settling in, it could be a sign that it would help to become clear about, what different parts of your mind are valuing, what different parts of your mind are prioritizing and making important. And then becoming clear is the next facet of mindfulness, that the Satipatthana Sutta lays out for us. So sampajanya is the Pali word, and it is what points to the clear comprehension of what's happening. Sampajanya. It's clear awareness of what we're doing. You might think of it as being the opposite of being tied to or caught within a thought or an emotion. Clear awareness can be steady, it can be strong and unblinking. It can also toggle on and off, or be completely lacking. So if we're not settling in, it could be a sign that it would help us to work on our ability to wake up out of identification. Work on our ability to come into sampajanya. One of the more common techniques, that's not outlined in the early text as far as I know, but really assists clear comprehension, is the common practice of noting. Right? And with noting practice, as you are probably aware, we apply a short, internal, verbal word or phrase to whatever's happening. This is great for helping us wake up out of trains of thought, waking up out of emotions, waking up out of identification with experience and regain a measure of balance. And over time, we can become familiar with our patterns. It can be very interesting to become familiar with our patterns, our tendencies, our habits. And we can become wise about the ways of our mind. This helps us to develop the skill of waking up. Next on the Buddha's list is mindfulness itself. It's interesting. I think it's interesting that in some of the more recent translations of the Satipatthana Sutta, I see it being translated as establishments of mindfulness. The idea being that the body, pleasure and pain, mind, and Dhamma teachings are where we establish mindfulness. right? In this sense, mindfulness is not random. Instead, these are the domains where we set up our mindfulness. So if our mind is jumping around, perhaps it's a sign that we haven't been clear for ourselves what theme we want to establish. One thing that I think helps to clarify too, is that we can find a clear, settled spot, within the arising and passing of sight, sounds, body sensations, thoughts. But if we find we're getting mesmerized, strung along by this kaleidoscope of experience, it could be a sign that we need to be a little more selective about our theme. And especially, instead of allowing the world around us, allowing the media, or even our old internal karma to effectively determine what we're paying attention to, it could be a sign that we need to decide what we're going to bring to mind and keep in mind. Right? We're proactive in that sense. Mindfulness shifts from being something passive and reactive to being proactive. We decide what to keep in mind. Now, there is naturally some back and forth in what we're paying attention to, such that there's a foreground and a background of experience. This is what we see in the Anupasana Sutta, Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta. The breathing starts in the foreground, but it then moves to the background as we bring themes like impermanence to the foreground. So just know that it's natural for there to be layers to mindfulness. And as I said before, distraction could be a sign that we need to build up that muscle of ours of staying with the theme. Distraction could also be a sign that we just need a new theme. Right? Instead of the breath, we need to set ourselves up with something different. We need to serve ourselves something other than what we've been serving ourselves. So if we're really being, whacked by some hindrance, by some type of destabilizing energy, it can help to drop the breathing as a primary theme of meditation and instead make the hindrance itself the theme of practice. This is rich terrain. We can interview the hindrance, you might say. We can ask, Mr. Attraction, Miss Aversion, what are you exactly? Tell us about yourself. Why are you here? What do you want? The thing is that feeling like you're asking the right questions finally, can help the mind settle in. Even in the midst of the mind, part of the mind going completely bonkers, because we have that sense that we're on to something, it can help the mind come into a kind of settledness. Okay, the last part of the preamble recommends that we set aside longing and distress with regard to the world. And as you may know, I'm fond of saying that this is not about us giving up caring about the world around us, caring about the people around us. But with this one, it's an encouragement such that when we engage in periods, that we do engage in periods of time, when we help the world by helping ourselves. Now, if our practice it's floundering, it could be a sign that we don't trust that yet. Could be a sign that we don't trust that yet. But as the Buddha said in the teaching called the Acrobats, he said, looking after oneself, one looks after others. And looking after others, one looks after oneself. And in particular, how does one look after others by looking after oneself? He says, by practicing mindfulness, by developing it, by practicing it a lot. So these are the things the Satipatthana Sutta would have us clue into, about how our practice is going. I want to bring in two more facets to kind of close out. So in addition to checking in with what the Satipatthana would have us check in, it can also help us to check in with our posture, so to speak, and also check in with our life circumstances. So posture first. It may sound funny, but if our practice is feeling a little off balance, it could be a sign that we just need to hold the posture for 30 minutes instead of 15. Give ourselves more practice at it, or, sit for 45 or 60 minutes instead of 30. It could also be a sign that it would help to change our posture. And as you may know, there are these four traditional postures: sitting, standing, walking, and lying down. All fine for practice. And personally, I also think changing posture could mean engaging in writing, for example, or drawing, or some sort of creative activity. The basic idea is to wake up our enthusiasm, and or do something that aligns with our affinities. Be creative. Make whatever changes help to make practice engaging. So that's simple enough. I think more complex might be stepping back and seeing if our practice is giving us signs that our life circumstances are challenging. For example, maybe our job demands a lot of multitasking. And furthermore, it's hard to concentrate on one task because the tasks behind that one are also screaming for attention. It could also be that, perhaps our family life is chaotic, in any number of ways, or maybe our peers aren't fully in sync with where we are. On the other hand, we can reflect a little bit and ask, is it possible to say no to some commitments? To scale back on that. Is it possible to scale back on busyness and scale back on how we might distract ourselves? So all that's one layer. It might also be that our life is challenging in terms of meeting our basic needs. Maybe not all the time, but for periods of time, because the fact is not everybody feels secure in their housing situation, right? Not everybody, who wants to practice feels secure in feeding themselves, or getting sufficient clothing, or getting their healthcare needs met. And there might be any number of ways in which we don't feel safe, mentally or physically. So in the midst of these kinds of challenges, it can be even more important to use the tools the path offers us. to take care of our own hearts and minds. We don't have to wait for life to become all good before the practice can do us some good. And so the funny thing is that sometimes if our minds are going crazy, it could be a sign that we're turning away from suffering, which is completely natural. But what the Buddha encouraged us to do, on the other hand, was to face difficulty squarely, as much as is wise in any given moment. But in the long term, face difficulty squarely. You may remember that the task of the First Noble Truth is to comprehend dukkha. It's the very first thing that we start with. And just along those lines, just to share, my first aha moment, I think it was, being on this path, was back in the mid-1990s when I heard something that Tara Brach said. She was giving a talk, and she mentioned kind of casually, she said, suffering can be a gateway to freedom. And over the years, I've realized, along those lines, that it can be a relief to be real. There's a certain kind of relaxation that can happen just when we're knowing that we're being real. So I've talked a lot about the signs that something in our practice could be working better. But in the refrain of the Satipatthana, here's a hint about what happens when practice is working. Right? In the refrain, it says that we can abide independent, not clinging to anything in the world. This is the point at which we're no longer ambivalent. Right? We're no longer chasing after random, mundane satisfactions. Our searching and wandering have subsided. And the mind feels unified, no longer being pulled in different directions. You might think of it as all the oars in our mental boat. They're in sync and pulling in the same direction, and we're feeling in the zone, as the athletes say. This became an image for me years ago after my daughter described her best moments being on a crew team in high school. In that boat, there are 8 teammates. And at certain points, Sonia said she could sense that each of their oars entered the water at the same time. Right? They all pulled the same amount of time. They exited the water at the same time, and all the oars returned together. And once again, entered the water. And again. She said it was just a wonderful feeling. And in our practice, when we have that wonderful feeling, it's what's thought of as an immaterial pleasure. We touch into that, and once we get good at it, it can become part of what keeps us coming back. It enlivens our practice. So, in one sense, this is really hard. It's not, these things that we're dealing with are not simple things. Practice is not always a series of slam dunks, but at the same time, engaging in these explorations can just be incredibly interesting, incredibly rewarding. And that's what I hope for you. And that is all I wanted to serve up to you at this moment. I hope it's helped. Thank you for your attention. Um, we have about 30 minutes left. And before we dive into questions and discussion, would it be okay to go ahead and engage in just another little short practice period? Okay. Another 5-minute period. And perhaps, hopefully, we feel a little warmed up now. Perhaps a little clear in our purpose. And do attend to your posture if you like. Let the eyes close. Take a deep in breath. Release the breath. Breathe in deeply. Feel your body. Breathe out and relax. If you can, if you like, feel your way into the peace of the mind, just being settled on the breathing. There's peace and pleasure in that. See if it's possible for your mind to appreciate, to value that. Breathing in, breathing out. To see if in these very moments you can do your best to value the peace, the clarity, and the freedom this path points us to. And how does one look after others? By looking after oneself, by practicing mindfulness, by developing it, by practicing it a lot. So please, let's hear from others.
Carl, good morning. Thank you. My favorite thing that I learned today, what you said, was that we need stillness to set roots. That really resonates for me. And one question, you said awake out of identification with experience and move into balance, or identification with balance, where it doesn't matter.
Waking up out of identification, we can come into a kind of balance.
And come into balance.
Regain our balance. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Rather than being pushed and pulled.
Right.
That's the idea there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So like I said, one of the things that as I started to really sit with this teaching for a while was just how it points back to how we can see what's happening and not just have it be whatever is happening, but it can be a sign of things that we can work with. And not just in a general way, but there are some specific angles that the Buddha thought would help us. So that it's not just keep at it and try and hope for the best. No, there are ways to be smart about it and skillful.
Hey, Carl. I really appreciated this teaching. I think it was just what I needed. Because it's a pattern I see over and over in my life. But if something's not working, I have this pattern of just being like, oh, well, there's something wrong with me. Like there's just some fundamental flaw. And instead, this sort of like just relieves that burden a little bit and says, no, like I'm a little cockpit and I can just turn this one up and turn this one down and get the recipe just right. And maybe all like, and I know how crazy that pattern is, but it's like, it's deeply rooted. And I keep seeing it over and over and over in other examples and instances of my life. And here's just another one. Every time I don't feel settled, I'm like, oh, there's something wrong with me. And no, maybe it's just the conditions aren't quite right and I can tweak something. So there's this tremendous sense of relief from this teaching.
Great. That's great. And what you're saying reminds me of how noting practice can be so helpful. Just noting that again and again, whenever it comes up, see it for what it is, pop out of that emotional state of that judgment, that self-perception, and it becomes less enthralling, it becomes less sticky, the more we name it. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
that reminds me, Emily, of Shulamit, maybe you would know what it is. There's a type of therapy that emphasizes parts of you and establishing leadership of the parts of you. Do you know what I'm speaking about?
You mean
Pardon me?
like focusing or?
Yeah, it's a type of therapy that is all about really learning these parts of yourself and then establishing leadership, making choices, and saying, yes, there's a part of me that is like this, but I can choose to.
Well, in focusing, we say a part of me feels this way. In other words, it's not all of me.
Yeah.
It's just something inside of me feels that way right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like a little bit of an example.
Yeah.
I'm not all angry. A part of me feels angry right now.
Mm.
Right.
Something inside. Right.
Interesting.
One of my favorite things to recall is, I can't remember the exact teaching, but this mind of ours is as diverse as the animal kingdom. There can be a real zoo in there sometimes. Not everything's cuddly, and not everything's cuddly. And Hanisaro Bhikkhu uses the term committee. The mind is made up of a committee. So there's definitely I'm sensing a theme here, right? Or a helpful perception. It's not all just the one thing in us, and we're doing a good job or we're doing a bad job, or we're this way or that way.
Well, I think the practice is a sign maybe that the practice is going a little better is when you see that without spinning off into some dismay, and oh, there you are. It's like Billie Holiday's Good Morning Heartache. There you are again. But thank you. This was so practical and helpful, Carl, today. Yeah. The signs and portents. It's really good. Thank you.
And go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love this kind of return to the essence of it, this constant return. I noticed, and I love we have this place to cultivate how we want to be, because by practicing, then we can be in life with our practice as well. I just noted this week constant additional outwardly stress. I think that we're really at a place that people are very stressed, and there's pressure, that I should be stressed and I should strive and I should be something other than and do more. And it just is so refreshing to cultivate this with you, Carl, and return to that and return to it. Because daily practice helps us. But in my own private practice, I'm just seeing an inundated amount of clients with additional stress. And so I just so appreciate this coming back, recognizing, I really don't fit with that mindset out there. I don't want to be that busy, and I don't want to be that measure my success by that standards. And to just review this again is, I'm very, very grateful for this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Last night was our poetry sangha, and a new friend shared this poem, which I shared again this morning, and I just heard it differently based on your teaching, Carl, in this conversation. If I can it's pretty short. She asks me to kill the spider. Instead, I get the most peaceful weapons I can find. I take a cup and a napkin. I catch the spider, put it outside, and allow it to walk away. If I am ever caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, just being alive and not bothering anyone, I hope I am greeted with the same kind of mercy. And what I had not heard before is the thinking about that I am the spider, right? I am the spider, that part of I am the spider, and the person who is showing mercy, and both sides of that, and responding with peace and mercy for ourselves and for others. And just noticing that and being able to find the peaceful, finding that peaceful, skillful response. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sharon, who is the poet?
Rudy Francisco, and I'll post the link to it.
Thank you.
I just got back from a 2-week trip to Costa Rica, and these comments bring up for me, and before that, in the summer in August, I was in Africa on a safari. And what I didn't expect was the degree to which I came to care about all the animals. They weren't objects anymore for me. The behavior of the animals, even to the point of spiders, I care. They when we were in Costa Rica, the guide rubbed kind of a feather in front of the hole where he expected that a black widow spider might be. And sure enough, it gradually crawled out and looked at us. And I cared about the spider.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a new experience for me to not just see it as an object, but to see it as what you want to call it, a sentient being. And I also came to understand the Tibetans better when they objected to just when they were building, throwing the dirt, and these may be our ancestors here, we've got to be careful. and just the whole of life took on a whole different meaning for me. It kind of vibrated with a sense of, it wasn't me and the other anymore. It was a oneness, which was really a wonderful thing that I didn't expect. But it was a wonderful thing to take away. And this by Shazzy, this description of this, you're both the person and the spider. That's exactly what my experience was. In fact, bringing up the spider was Costa Rica for me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting you mentioned that about the soil, Kathleen. It brings to mind Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, in which she speaks of the Potawatomi language, really kind of personifying the landscape around you. That no distinction between life and not alive, but the rocks and the water, and all of it is.
It's all one thing.
All one thing. And that's very wonderful to dwell in those kind of spaces, I think. To think and feel that way is really feels such a privilege and so marvelous.
Yeah. And it's also painful.
Yeah.
Because I care more intensely about Kenya and about Uganda and about Costa Rica, all places where starvation is a huge issue. It's a mixed blessing, but mostly good.
Right? It is. It's what is.
Yeah. It deepens one's caring.
Any comments from anybody we haven't heard yet?
Well, I've just been thinking about what Emily said, because I have that lifelong, there's something wrong with me thing going on. And lately, I feel like I'm kind of like dancing around some kind of insight about that. And last night I've been writing at night. Last night I wrote, FOMO is a delusion. Yeah, this notion, FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. Oh, fear of missing out. That this idea that everybody else gets it but me, it's diluted, and like I'm trying to see how I'm creating that identity of being inherently defective, uniquely defective. How I'm constructing, putting that together. And like taking a really good look at all the proof that I have. When the proof comes up, like taking a really good look at it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if this is making sense. I'm trying to.
It does.
Because I just so want to let go of that identity, and I want Emily to let go of it too. I mean, it just is so painful. And I was talking the other day to a friend, another practitioner, and about this whole feeling that, I'm doing it wrong, and she said, isn't it amazing how all of us feel like we're doing it wrong? It is. Isn't that amazing? It's just amazing. Like that I can think that there's something unique about me that I can't get this practice when just about everybody thinks they're doing it wrong. So anyway, that's what I have to say.
I'd love to do a talk on what you're describing. Maybe that's the next one, because it's so much playing around at that edge of I think I kind of see what's going on, but it's still got some. I'm sorry, I still fall into it, but not quite as much, and so it's. Well, now I'm not making any sense anymore. But anyway.
Well, then also, like,
but I love what comes to mind are the reflections that go along with the 5 hindrances. We notice that we know if it's present or not, which in my mind also means what exactly is it that I'm naming a particular hindrance? What is it that I'm naming inadequacy? How does that manifest in my thoughts and in pleasure and pain? How does that manifest in perceptions and thinking patterns? And then how does that come up? How can it be let go of? How can it be kept at bay? Those things that give us a hard time. Anyway.
I think of it as measuring ourselves against whether or not we've reached all the jhanas. We're not good enough unless we've gone through 1, 2, done them all, experienced them all. I'll live a long time before that happens.
Well, it is noon, and I want to respect people's schedules. And I actually have a commitment to go out on a garden tour in this wonderfully bad weather. But we're meeting some people.
Enjoy.
But I sure appreciate everybody.
Thank you, Carl.
Everybody being here this morning. And again, I just so hope this has helped your practice.